on the coordination. All right, welcome back to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We're joined by our colleagues in the House Judiciary Committee, and we're here to wrap up testimony from yesterday that we missed. And I want to say that I really appreciate Auditor Hoffer's flexibility, as we were a little overscheduled yesterday, and I wanted to make sure we had ample time to hear about his work on some of the audits with sheriff's offices. So Auditor Hoffer, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you. And I don't mind the switch. I was born to serve, Mike. You know that. So what can I do for you?
So you have sent us a number of documents on this topic, and I wonder if maybe first you could tackle or give us a brief summary of what your office and the contractor found, both with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office and the bonus issue in the Caledonia Sheriff's Department.
Sure. Let me start with Franklin County. That is an ongoing investigation, and I can't even tell you what I shared with the state police. I apologize, but I think that's the appropriate thing to do. Sorry.
Fair enough, but I think you made just aware that your auditor did find something that was referred to the Vermont State Police, and that was why we got up to date. Okay.
No doubt we'll be hearing more about that in the future. As for Caledonia, the audit team from McSorley was down there on a routine audit. As you know, we do 6 sheriffs one year and 8 the next. And this was, as I say, routine, and they came across a reference that actually pertained to activity following June 30, the end of the fiscal year they were reviewing or auditing, and it was just into the subsequent fiscal year, this one, 23. But it was of such size and importance that they noted it in their audit report. And as you now know, I think without any question, it was a substantial sum of money, $400,000 for 16 people. I read in the Caledonia Record, which is kind of curious because they never called me, but they reported the sheriff's comments to the effect that he had done that routinely over the years. He couldn't provide or routinely provide benefits. I guess they run a tight ship. So he said something similar to the audit team, or so I'm told, and they said to him, "Oh, okay, can you provide some evidence to that effect?" And he said yes, and the evidence provided showed that in 2018, there were substantial bonuses, not quite to this level. It was 180,000, a lot of money. At that time, about 7,000 per employee. The next year, it dropped to 18,000. The year after that, 34,000, and the year after that, 4,000. So the 400 really stands out in that context. So for anyone to say it was routine is to ignore the magnitude of that final year. And there's one other thing that I think is very important, no doubt really important to the incoming sheriff, who's now the sheriff, and that is that 400,000 represented about 60% of the department's entire liquidity. In that little spreadsheet I sent, you can see that the total of cash and receivables at the end of that fiscal year was about 700,000. And so to give away 400 really doesn't tie the hands, but it really reduces the options available to and the cushion for the incoming sheriff. So it's a lot of money. Now, I think it's fair to say, as was pointed out by Tom Stretton in the memo that he sent to me that I shared with you, I can't think of a good reason why there isn't a consistent policy for this and related financial matters throughout the sheriff's community. It's not for me to dictate it. That's up. You guys could do that if you choose to. But I spoke to Annie Noonan earlier today, and my guess is that she and John Campbell and most, if not all, the sheriffs would be happy to communicate with you about beginning a process to go down that road. I would hope so.
There seemed to be some broad consensus in the testimony we heard yesterday to kind of head in that direction. One of the reasons I wanted to have you in is that I think McSorley, McCoy and Company, the contracted auditing firm, they made some pretty specific recommendations. And I wonder maybe if you could summarize those for the committee as we're thinking about things that we might either add to a bill that we're already existing on, or put in some future legislation this session.
Yeah, it certainly seems reasonable on the face of it to involve the side judges, assistant judges, I should say. They are part of county government. In fact, that's about all there is to county government, the two of them plus staff and the sheriffs. So I see no reason why they shouldn't be engaged, particularly since in most counties, if not all, they provide some of the resources to the sheriffs. I don't think it's a large percentage. Typically, it's modest. And did you guys get that link to my website where we have that information for all the 14 sheriffs? Okay. So that's a perfectly reasonable suggestion. It's not for me to say, who should manage and control that, but I thought that Tom Stretton's suggestions were reasonable. Let me just say one other thing of a broader nature. I'm not a public safety guy. That's not my background. But I think I might have told you when I was in a few weeks ago, Mike, about 5 years ago, we did an inquiry into the state and local government expenditures for public safety statewide. And for FY17, now a few years ago, it was $574 million. Now, obviously, that's not a magnitude like healthcare, 6.5 billion, or a couple of billion for education, but it's a boatload of money. And if it were me, I mean, this is a much bigger question, particularly because of the constitutional nature of the sheriff's offices. But I would think it might be a good time to at least start a discussion in parallel with the other one, which is much more immediate, and ask yourselves and all the players, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think we would all agree, public safety. We want to keep Vermonters safe. But the question is, how best can we do that without redundant administrative costs and insurance and all the pieces that go into the 574 million? I would be shocked if we couldn't come up with a system that could save money and achieve the same thing. That's easy for me to say. But it's just a thought. I just want to share that with you. And I'm not down on the sheriffs, okay?
Well, as you've shown us, there's a wide variety of cash positions and indebtedness and the size of the department. So there's definitely not one size fits all when it comes to the finances of the sheriff's office.
And and it gets more complicated with the transport deputies who are effectively state employees. It's a little odd. What we see today is not the result of a strategic plan, a cohesive, coherent strategic plan. It just evolved, and that's not unusual. That happens in government all the time. But here we are, and maybe it's a good time to ask the question: is this the best approach? And I don't know the answer. And luckily, that's your job and not mine.
Well, on this and many other public safety issues that have evolved over time, I would note that the regional dispatch question is another one that we and our Senate colleagues are going to be diving into over the course of the next year or two. We definitely are looking at patchwork solutions that have evolved over time that aren't serving communities all that well, and there's general consensus that there's a problem, but the solutions are myriad. So at least the proposed ones. So to get back to the specifics here, I mean, when I look at these bonuses that are far in excess of the compensation for some of these individuals, is there any comparable bonus structure in state government that's even remotely like this?
Not to my knowledge, and I have attempted, and usually with success, in obtaining bonuses for some of my employees over the years, usually in the nature of a couple $1,000s if they've really done exceptional work, and if I believe that their current salary is not, sufficient or fairly reflects their efforts. But to get that much, it's a process. The state does not allow people in my position or an agency head to just do that. You have to go through HR. I mean, I have some flexibility, oddly, in statute allows me to set the salary of employees, but of course the CBA has to be addressed for classified employees. So it's work. You have to make the case. They give you a fair hearing, and I don't see why that shouldn't apply to the sheriffs. I mean, $25,000 was the average for these folks. That's a pretty big bonus. They didn't all receive that, of course, because of the taxes, but still.
Well, so this was the main issue that I wanted to get out on the table in testimony. You folks here have questions for Auditor Hoffer? Representative Waters Evans.
Thank you. Hi. So you mentioned that the $400,000 equaled 60% of their entire liquidity. I was wondering if there's a minimum amount or like a sort of percentage that they should retain, if it's required or recommended for a sheriff's department.
I don't think there's any formal guidance about that at all. I mean, particularly in light of the fact that they're so different. That some of them are very small, don't have an opportunity to make as much money outside of the straight ahead work that the state provides. Some have much more, some are more aggressive, some are more likely to find work, sometimes across the line into somebody else's county. But no, to answer your question simply, I don't believe there's any guidance on that.
Representative Rachelson.
Thank you. So is there no other regulation, ethics guideline that would apply in the situation still but I'm just wondering if really nothing at all is applicable to this situation.
Not to my knowledge. Now, just because they're constitutional officers doesn't mean, as far as I can tell, that you couldn't require them to adhere to the same guidelines that I am required to adhere to. I am a constitutional officer. The difference, of course, is that most of my employees are classified. In the case of the sheriffs, they are not. So they're not covered by the CBA, although some of them participate in the state's pension fund and so forth. But you could investigate that. I don't know what the answer would be.
And they get no federal money that would have them have to adhere to particular conditions?
That's a good question. Some get federal money, some get passed through federal money from the state for various purposes. It's not usually a lot, although you might see more in the bigger counties. But those funds, as a rule, do not have the kinds of requirements that you see in other areas of state government. You know, the pass-through stuff for police and sheriffs is not going to require changes in management as a rule.
But they may require that federal audit that gets sent off to Washington. And if there are findings in the audit, it will raise some flags.
Well, the federal single audit or uniform guidance typically doesn't kick in unless a grant from the feds is $750,000 or more. And that would be most unusual for the sheriffs. It's possible, unlikely. But those audits would not address this kind of a question.
No, right.
They would address the kind of performance expected for the use of those funds. It's a tough question, tough issue. I mean, you could, if you wanted, just make some, or if not all, of these employees state employees, like the transport deputies. But I think all of it is in flux year to year. Some probably are better at managing the system than others over time. And if you make people classified, then if the demand for their services goes down, they've got to go. So there's a risk.
So, Doug, my understanding is that both this issue and the issues that resulted in the referral to the state police up my way both came out of the audit that happens every 2 years.
Correct.
And is that, to your knowledge, the only independent review of the books for the sheriff's offices?
I believe it is. Although remember, as you probably already know, that there are the so-called transition audits, 7 or 8 of which are underway, right, or will be underway shortly. And I'll mention something to you about that as well. The statute requires that when a sheriff announces a retirement or loses an election, from the date of the election through the date of the next or successor sheriff being sworn in, during that period, the assistant judges are required to co-sign all checks on behalf of the sheriff's department. That's one. The other is another part of that same statute that requires those assistant judges to send my office a report for the period from election day through the end of January. And I've heard from two sets of assistant judges this year for the first time in 10 years about this question, probably because there's been some coverage on it in the media. And forgive me, I realize I have no authority to waive statutory requirements, although that would be fun. In this case, I told both of these sets of side judges, I said, look, since McSorley-McCoy is going to be in there doing a professional audit covering the same period, at issue under the statutory requirement for you to prepare a report, which you're not trained to do, I'm going to tell you that my judgment is that that seems like a duplication of effort. And I'm not sure what value that adds to what is available to you and to the general public about that period, November, whatever, to the end of January. So forgive me, I didn't ask your permission, but it just seemed like they've got enough to do. They don't need to write reports about matters that are going to be covered by professionals. And you may want to consider whether you need both of those provisions going forward. Sorry.
So your recommendation would be to us to take a look at the statute that requires the side judges to do that report and to perhaps make it so that if your audit is if your professional audit is happening anyway in that time period, that we just get rid of that duplicative thing that I don't believe the side judges, even the side judge who has the same name as me, would want to write a report about that up our way.
Now, having said that, I think it's, you could make a case for keeping the requirement that they participate during those 3 months or almost 3 months in the running of the office through co-signing checks. That's not unreasonable. It's a little bit of work, but once a week you all get together and you sign some checks.
I think that would be one of the few checks that there are on the powers of the sheriff over the money flowing in and out of the office. I know we're going to have to get up to floor shortly. Are there any other questions for Auditor Hoffer?
Yeah, Mike, I just sent your name, but Representative Chapin has a question.
Go ahead, yeah.
Hi, thanks, Auditor Hoffer. I'll make it quick. So it's my understanding that there's a statute out there that requires the auditor's office to do this audit or contract out for this audit every 2 years, but that does not include any requirement for the sheriff's offices to follow any, whatever the standards are, good accounting practices.
Yes, except that my office is required to provide guidance to the sheriffs about how they should conduct their business, but it is not, that is guidance. It's no different than the manual that was referred to in Tom Stretton's memo. We provide them, I think, with decent guidance, and I know they appreciate it. They certainly have over the years, but those are recommendations as to how to do their business, not legal requirements.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Right.
I appreciate the opportunity, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for being here today, Auditor Hoffer. So we will adjourn and head up to the floor and things back up here.